there my friends, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be exploring watercolour pencils. The ones I'm using today are by Faber Castell, and the name on the actual pencil is Albrecht Durer. So it's Faber Castell Albrecht Durer watercolour pencils. And what you're seeing here is I've taken a small cheap plastic palette. You can get these from like pound shops and places like that, and I've used a very fine sandpaper and I've sanded the surface of each well in the palette. This way it gives it a rough texture and it's able to pick up pigment from a dry medium such as a pencil or a pastel. You could use this to work with pastels as well. But here I'm rubbing very gently the watercolour pencil dry over the dry palette, the rough surface of the dry palette. This leaves some pigment in the palette to which I can then add a little bit of water. Watercolour pencils are very, very useful. They can be used in many different ways, and I'm just going to show you a few ways today. So with a pipette, I'm just adding a little drop of deionized water. That's the sort of water you buy in large containers for car batteries and things like that. And what it is, it's a water that's deionized. It's in the name. It's had all the impurities taken out, so it's very pure. So it won't affect the light fastness of the paints you're working with. So if at any time I'm working with a water-based medium, such as watercolors, watercolor pencils, inks, even acrylics, I will use deionized water. You can get it from Asda, Sainsbury's, Wilko's, places like that. It's readily available in many places. So that's what I'm doing there. I've added a little drop of water with a plastic pipette to each well, and off camera I do have two more containers, 2 jars of water, of deionized water. One container is for rinsing my brush clean, and the second container is for adding water to my medium, which is in this case watercolour pencil. Okay, so here we have a piece of paper. It's 9 inches by 12 inches, and it's the Arches Watercolour Coldpress paper. The weight's £140. I've already applied a very loose wash to the background around the squirrel, and if you want to see how I came up with the squirrel sketch, that's in a previous video you can find on my YouTube channel. I will add a pop-up card. Whether will appear, I don't know, because a lot of people have been having problems with the pop-up cards recently, so I will add a pop-up card, but whether it'll appear in this video or not remains to be seen. So I've used an acid-free washi tape to tape down the paper. I didn't stretch it. Maybe I should have done, but I didn't. And I do keep drying it with a hairdryer going through this project. So what I've done now is I've added water to the top area of the tail, and now from the palette that you've just seen, I'm just picking up a little bit of pigment with a wet brush, and I'm adding that pigment into the wetted area and just letting the paint do its thing, just letting it flow where it wants to flow. Now because the background is already dry, that creates like a barrier, so the paint will only spread where the area is wet. So I've used that technique. Out comes a very cheap hairdryer that I picked up from B&M. I think it was about £6 or £7. Does the job. Some people like using a heat tool. I just like using a hairdryer, low setting, keep working over the area until it's dry. It looks like I've got it really like an inch away from the surface. I've not. It's a few inches away from the surface because obviously I don't want to damage the paper in any way. As you've noticed, I don't do a big introduction going into each video, because when I personally like to watch videos on YouTube, I don't like listening to a big introduction before they get on with the project. So I hope you're enjoying my videos where I don't have a big introduction and you're just straight into seeing what the video is actually about. If you want to see a longer introduction, just leave it in the comments below, some ideas, and I'll take that on board. Okay, so the first layer of the tail is dry. So now I'm going in with the second layer. And with watercolour, you can honestly build up layer after layer after layer. A lot of people don't like watercolour because you can lift the pigment off the paper that you've already applied. But personally, I found that I only lift pigment where I want to lift pigment. If you lay the layers down and then heat dry them, wait for the paper to cool, which just takes a few minutes, and then go on with your next layer. As long as you're not scrubbing your brush backwards and forwards across the paper, the pigment that you've already laid down will stay there quite happily and won't move unless you want it to. So with the second layer, I've applied water again to begin with, then dropped the pigment in from the little plastic palette from the beginning. And I'm just going to carry on building these layers up. Now, if you do find you're getting a hard line, maybe you missed an area where you didn't apply water first, just go in with a damp brush, pop a little bit of water in, and just feed the colour back out and into the water. Going along that left-hand edge there, and making sure it's going right up against the edge of the tail where you need it to be. If you're looking at doing a squirrel painting for yourself, then I do suggest taking a look at 2 websites that provide copyright-free reference images, and that's pixabay.com and unsplash.com. There's many more sites out there, but if you give those 2 a try and find some lovely images of squirrels to draw and paint from, and they're all copyright free. Okay, so trying something different today, and I actually set up my phone to record at a different angle, and I'm hoping that this will enable you to see what I'm doing to a finer degree. So the first brush I was using right at the very beginning for adding washes to the tail was a Durer Rowney Aquafine round and a number 6. I had a play around with that brush on the tail, but then I reverted back to this old faithful brush of mine, and this is it's by a company called Rosemary Co. Rosemary's Brushes is a very well-known brand in the UK. And I was fortunate enough that Rosemary herself did gift me quite a big pack of brushes a few years ago to test and try out. And I will be doing a review on those at some point. But they are fantastic brushes. And this one is possibly my favourite. Yeah, probably my favourite. It's a number 6 and it's a series 344. If you're doing intricate detailing with watercolour, a lot of people reach for tiny brushes, sort of a 0, a 00, a 000. But the trouble with those brushes is the hairs are few, and they're very small. They're not very long at all, so they can't really hold a lot of paint. They can't hold a lot of paint. They can't hold a lot of water. Whereas this number 6, because of the length of the hairs, and there's so many hairs compacted in there, and the quality of the brush is so high that it will retain a point, as you can see there, that I can go on painting and painting and painting for minutes at a time, putting loads and loads of detail in, not having to refill the brush because it can hold such a large amount of water and pigment. And that's the way to go. If you want to work in a detailed area, get a nice big brush like this that retains a very, very fine point. If you go on Rosemary Co, their website, there's loads of series of brushes to choose from. There's something for every pocket, as in expense. You can go really expensive, or you can go relatively cheap. And I don't mean cheap in the make, I mean cheap in the price. So once you've got a favourite brush, you know, you won't want to be without it. And yes, it is trial and error, because I love this brush, but it might not be the ideal brush for some people. But just to pick up a couple of different brushes from a well-known brand and give them a try. And if you do like what you know what you're working with, then you can sort of branch out and get a few more brushes of that particular make, that particular brand, and that particular series. As I said, this is a series 344 and it's a number 6. Okay, I'm just looking at the list to make sure I've not forgotten to add in any of the materials that we're using today. So yeah, as I said, there's a separate video talking about how I do my preliminary sketches, my initial sketches from photographs. I also sketch from life, but in this case I was sketching from a few different images and making the pose up in my head. Combining different photographs, and then I used a light box to get the initial sketch traced and then onto this watercolour paper, but that's dealt with in the sketch video that you can find on my website. As I said, I will include a pop-up card, but whether you can see it or not is a different matter. Now the background, as you can see, has got a little starring effect. And there's such a simple way of achieving that. You just put water onto the paper, then add your paint to the water as we did with the tail. Then as the paint is drying, you just drop more drops of water into the paint and it just bleeds out. Some people call them cauliflowers or a blooming effect, and it can, yeah, just to take note, it can happen accidentally, but with this background I did it on purpose. Okay, so we're working the squirrel's forearm and shoulder area in exactly the way that we worked the tail, and it's exactly the same way I work the face, applying water first, then from my palette where I've scrubbed the pencils and added water just to make a paint mixture, then I'm adding that to the water area. And as you can see, it flows so nicely, and it is a lovely paper, the Archie's Watercolour Coldpress, £140. It is very nice, but because I didn't stretch it, I did have to keep drying it with the hairdryer. As you can see, I've got it stapled around the edges to stop it shifting too much. So if you do have time, stretch your paper. If you don't have time and you don't want to be messing around with the hairdryer all the time, then maybe work with a heavier weight paper, such as a 300-pound paper. So we've built up the layers across the squirrel, doing exactly the same as you've seen so far. It's a rinse and repeat, It's apply water, apply pigment and dry with a drying tool, or you can just leave it to dry. If you've got time to wander away, make a sandwich, have a cup of tea, come back, then you obviously can let the paper dry on its own. I just wanted to speed things up. Once I'm in the mood for painting, I do want to just be getting on with the painting, so between each layer I dried it with the hairdryer. So once you're happy that you've got enough layers down and you've got enough difference in your tones, your darks and your lights, you can then move on to either applying the watercolour pencil dry. As you can see, that's what I'm doing here. But you don't have to apply it dry. This is completely up to an individual. When you get to a certain point in a painting, when you're working with watercolour pencils, and you're happy with the results, so you can actually leave it that way. You could leave it looking quite fresh and sort of open with no detailing, if that's the way you want to work. I like detail, and I like to go between working the pencils wet and working them dry. So what I'm doing here, as I've already done in the face, I'll add a little bit of watercolour pencil dry now, different colours. Don't forget those colours will mix. They blend slightly when applying them dry, but they will really mix like paint, because that's what they are when water is applied. So you can keep them dry and you can just finish your painting now just with dry medium, or you can carry on adding water. So you can add a little bit of the dry pencil and then add water to it. I did a little bit of both. So every painting, don't be frightened of experimenting. And what I wanted to do, I wanted to build up multiple layers, adding the pigments at this point dry, and then adding a little bit of water where I felt was needed. And this way you've got the best of both worlds, really. Having said that, if you don't have watercolour pencils, if all you've got are watercolour pans, as in watercolour paints, whether they're in pans or tubes, you can still do a project like this. If you've got watercolour pans or tubes, work up your layers, by doing wet into wet, which is the effect that I used to build up the squirrel to begin with. That's adding wet medium to a wet paper. And then if you don't have watercolour pencils, you can still go in and do this kind of detailing with coloured pencils, i.e. wax pencils or oil-based pencils. I've got videos on my YouTube channel now that involve working with normal coloured pencils. There's a penguin in coloured pencil, so you can work your details up that way. Obviously you can't go on top of that then with watercolour. You've got to have watercolour and then oil and wax-based pencils on top, not the other way round, because the oil and wax-based pencils will repel anything that's water-based. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now I'm adding detail using a brush. And what you can do with your watercolour pencils is not only scrib them off and use them in a plastic palette, but you can also wet a brush and take the pigment directly from the pigmented pencil. Okay, I'm just pausing, getting a quick drink of water. So this doesn't damage your brush. I'm being very, very gentle, and it doesn't damage your pencils either. This is what they're meant for. That they are pure watercolour pigment wrapped in a casing of wood. So you can just wet your brush and just go straight over to your pencil and take the pigment straight off the pencil. And as you can see, this brush, this Rosemary Co No. 6 Series 344 is amazing. It never loses its point. It retains that shape tremendously well. It's got to be one of the best brushes that I've ever worked with. And I'll use this brush with watercolour pencils, and with Inktense, which is it's not a watercolour. Inktense is a water-based ink, a water-soluble ink. So as you can see, I'm building up the layers differently now. So I could have done this with the dry pencil. Obviously the lines wouldn't have been as smooth, because this being a cold press paper, I'm actually hitting the texture of the paper. And then working in areas where you do want the texture of the paper to show, can be represented here on the tail. So I wanted the tail to look fluffy. Obviously this is a really stylized painting, so I'm not going for realism here. It just looks cute and cuddly, doesn't it? So if I was going for realism with this squirrel, then a tail really doesn't look like that. They're not that fluffy or floofy. Because they're long hairs coming away from a central point on the tail. So, and obviously that isn't the case in this painting. But when you're working from photographs, there's going to be some point along the creative process where you just put your photo references away and make your painting your own. And in this case, I wanted it to be cute, I wanted it to look wintry. Yes, I've still got my Christmas tree up, and it is the 9th, I think it's the 9th of February. Let me just check my phone, because I've not got a calendar right in front of me. Yes, it's Tuesday the 9th of February, and I've still got we've still got our Christmas tree up, and the twinkly lights look gorgeous. It's been snowing, so we've got snow on the ground outside. I'm based in Cheshire in the UK, and it looks Christmassy out, so why not still have the Christmas tree up and paint something that's wintry looking. My favourite time of the year is Christmas, so hey ho. Okay, so we're still adding dry medium here. It's still the Faber Castell watercolour pencils, and I've got to admit they are phenomenal. They're a wonderful pencil. They're either available in sets or you can buy them open stock. Now, open stock means you can buy one pencil or two or 10 or 12. You can buy them as individual pencils, individual colours. So if you're not sure, if you feel you don't quite know if you're going to like this medium or not, then just order a couple, or 5 of your favourite colours. Just order a few of your favourite colours, ones that you think you're going to use. Give them a try, and then you can either buy the set, or you can just buy a few more individual colours and build them up that way. There's really no medium where I would suggest someone go out and buy a big set, the biggest set you can get, straight away. If it's something you've not worked with before, that could be a huge waste of money. If it's something that you buy and then you find you're really not compatible with, it's not necessarily that the product isn't good. Sometimes it's that the product doesn't suit the artist. And if you say, well, I'm a beginner, I'm not an artist, if you're creating art, class yourself as an artist. Give yourself a pat on the back because you've created something that didn't exist before. Now, talking of creating paintings, creating drawings, everything that I show on my YouTube channel is copyrighted to myself, because these are things that I will eventually sell or make prints from, etc. So the images that you're seeing me create are copyrighted to me. However, the techniques are what I want to share with you. The techniques are what I want you to use to help you create a style of your own and help you create works of your own. That's why I'll always include links to pixabay.com and unsplash.com. Pop over there, download yourself some images of subjects you like. I mean, you might like the techniques I'm using, but you might not be very fond of squirrels. You might like raccoons, or you might like bears or lions and tigers, or wolves or dingoes and coyotes or rabbits. Use the techniques to create the images that you want to see in your portfolio, that you want to see hanging on your walls. Make it your own. So there we have it. Red Squirrel in watercoloured pencil, and using a few different techniques with a fantastic brush by Rosemary Co. I'll have lots of links and in the description below, including the items that I've actually filmed this video with. Thank you so much for watching my videos. Thank you to all of my subscribers, and if you haven't clicked like, if you've liked what you've seen, please click like, and if you haven't subscribed already, please hit the subscribe button. It's really appreciated. And if you've got any comments of what you'd like to see me create, what subjects, what mediums, please leave it in the comments below. And until next time, take care. Bye for now. Bye bye.